is a segment of the show I like to call Screeching or Teaching. And Screeching or Teaching is an opportunity to look at various material on the internet from Christian thinkers or maybe sometimes non-Christian thinkers. Randal Rauser is a Christian, and he's also a Christian apologist, and yet he commonly critiques Christian apologists. I think he means of the more conservative or evangelical type. I wanted to play a clip for you on his criticisms of apologists who advocate for incrementalism in the Old Testament as it pertains to Yahweh's commands of the alleged genocide of the Canaanites. And so this is just a short clip, 1.5 minutes, and I wanted to reflect on some of his criticisms herein because I am an advocate of incrementalism, or what's sometimes called progressive revelation as it pertains to morality. I want to maybe ponder on one of the weaknesses of his suggestion here in how we analyze in ancient culture. Let's take a look here at this thought on how we should best understand the Old Testament texts from our 21st century perspective.
Used to expend a lot of effort and energy in defending passages in the Old Testament that appear to be brutally violent, cruel, crimes against humanity, and to constitute atrocities, by arguing, in fact, that these are morally praiseworthy. For example, John Calvin, the way he defends the slaughter of Canaanites is that all human beings are sinful and this was simply God's will. Today, the apologists don't really have the stomach for that, and they're increasingly arguing not that these passages are morally good or praiseworthy, but rather that they offer mere incremental improvements over other even more brutal ancient Near Eastern codes. But arguing that your text is a little bit less brutal, has somewhat fewer or more modest crimes against humanity or moral atrocities, is really not much of an apologetic. So I think that the Christian apologists need to consider a paradigm shift in how they approach these texts, to stop trying to make them look good, to recognize that these contain passages that are morally evil, that do constitute moral atrocities if they were to be applied. And then that should force a more radical hermeneutical reevaluation and theological reflection on how we interact with the passages and how we understand the authority of the Old Testament text.
All right. There it is. Randal, I want to applaud you for effectively communicating this objection you have in like 90 seconds. Like, that's a great job. You got it down under 90 seconds, so well done there. The concern I have here with this paradigm shift is that it's sort of twofold. We are looking through the past with our 21st century lenses. We are making moral evaluations based upon the moral progress that we have in fact made. We can only do so because of that moral progress. It would be entirely foreign for someone with a 21st century moral framework to ask ancient Israelites, hey, why do you do this? And why do you do that? That's immoral. These laws and regulations existed because of the society that they had. So for example, I'm sure, this is not new to you, but it's a common example used in this type of conversation. What do you do with the prisoners of war? In an agrarian society where there are no prisons, what do you do with these people? You just slaughter them? Well, that doesn't seem very loving and kind, and rather that seems like a crime against humanity. Well, so what was the solution? One solution in ancient Israel was you make them a slave. Now, slaves, there were regulations on slaves. For example, every 7 years, slaves would be set free. Did they follow that? No. Did the American slavery system follow this? Definitely no. I say all this because we are looking backward in history in the rearview mirror of our vehicle. We've come now only to appreciate the moral progress we've made. That in and of itself is an argument for incrementalism, because we are improving. The second thing I wanted to say is that there are going to be crimes against humanity that we commit to this very day. And people in 200 years, 300 years will say, oh, well, how did you ever believe that? We are simply bound by time and moral progress in making these evaluations. I think in understanding that, we can recognize where there was moral progress. So even if it were an utterly heinous evil into a modest evil into a neutral sort of thing, there's progress being made, and that is a good thing. We should recognize progress in that regard as good. So that's why I would be in support of incrementalism rather than this paradigm shift that you talk about. I don't think that it's fair to the ancient societies. Even in how we analyze non-biblical societies, we should seek to understand those societies, why they had the moral laws that they did. They weren't created in a vacuum. They were created for a reason, And what was that reason? There were certain constraints, social constraints, right? There weren't speed limit laws, obviously, because there were no vehicles back then. Laws exist for the social reasons that they do. Now, we may not always know what those reasons are. We might not discover what those reasons are, but there were reasons for it. Another example, why do you burn down an unclean house in ancient Israel? There was no germ theory, but you knew that when someone went into that house and they came out sick, they were throwing up or whatever, you got mold. So you need to burn down the house because it was unclean. So again, there was this reason. It seems odd to us to do it that way because we have mold remediation today in the 21st century. So we do things differently now. We do our best, given the circumstances, to pursue ethical truths and moral ethical progress. And I think that's one of the best arguments for incrementalism. So Randal, I'd welcome your response to this. Whether I qualify this as screeching or teaching, I'm actually going to put this one under teaching. While I disagree with Randal, I think he does make some salient points. And it is a concern. It's a tricky passage in the Old Testament. We can't just ignore these texts. Randal does a good job of making this part of the conversation in apologetics, looking at some call the dark side of Scripture or something like that. So I applaud Randal for doing that. I don't think we should be hiding from the truth, but we should be pursuing or striving for truth on these complex issues. So thanks, Randal, for your work there. So we'll qualify this one as teaching, in spite of the fact that I have some disagreements with him, and I would look forward to your response, Randal, as well.